My family treated me like their personal ATM, then cut me off when I stopped paying. You were only useful for your money, they said, blocking me from the family group chat. I just moved on. A year later, when their bills piled up and no one else would help, they showed up on my doorstep, desperate. I'm 33, female. I've been thinking about whether or not to share this story for a while now. It's one of those situations where it feels like I'm still living through it, even though so much time has passed. My family's always been complicated. I guess a lot of families are. But this was something else. It started out small, small enough that I thought I could handle it. But over the years, it turned into something unrecognizable, something I never saw coming. Let me start from the beginning. Growing up, I was always the good child. You know the one, doing well in school, never getting into trouble, always the one my parents would talk about with pride at family gatherings. My brother, Daniel, was the opposite. He wasn't a bad kid, but well, he had his issues. Always making poor decisions, getting into trouble, skipping school, things like that. He'd eventually get out of whatever mess he'd gotten himself into, but it always felt like I was the one they depended on, the reliable one. It wasn't a huge deal at first. Sure, I got more of the attention from my parents, but I never minded. I genuinely wanted to help. I wanted them to be proud of me. But as I got older, I started noticing something. It wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about expectation. When I got my first job out of college, things started to shift. Suddenly, I was the one they'd call when they needed help with something. When my dad's business took a hit, I was the one who helped cover the bills so they wouldn't lose their house. When my mom had an emergency surgery and her insurance didn't cover it all, I was the one writing the checks. And when Daniel got himself tangled up in debt after yet another failed business venture, guess who was there to bail him out? Yemi. Over time, it became routine. And every time they needed something, it felt like I couldn't say no, not because they'd beg or cry, but because, well, it felt like I was supposed to do it, like I was obligated. But then came the turning point. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. It wasn't like I got a call and they suddenly demanded money from me or anything. It was more like a slow buildup of little things that made me realize I was being taken advantage of. I started noticing the pattern, the constant requests, the expectation that I'd just be there to fix things, no questions asked. At first, it didn't bother me. I'd help out. I'd do it because I love them. But slowly, over the course of a few years, it started to wear me down. I was dipping into my savings, putting off my own financial goals, and barely even thinking about how much I was giving. It was just the way things were. And then I hit a wall. I just got a big promotion at work, and for the first time in a long time, I was thinking about my own future. I was working hard to build some stability for myself, finally saving up for a vacation, planning to buy my own place. And then my mom called. She had a medical procedure coming up that wasn't covered by insurance, and she needed a few $1,000s to cover it. I just helped her with another bill not even 6 months before. I didn't want to be the person to turn her down, but I was stretched thin. I had my own goals, my own plans. So I told her, Mom, I can't do this right now. I've helped out a lot already, and I'm working on some things for myself. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could tell she was disappointed, but she didn't say anything at first. She just hung up. I figured she'd be upset, but would get over it. I didn't think it was going to be a huge deal. Then, a few days later, my dad called. He didn't start with any pleasantries. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just launched right into it. You're being selfish, he said. I tried to explain myself, but he wasn't having it. He didn't even listen to my reasons. You've always been so good to us, he continued. But now, you're just letting us down. This is what you do when things get tough. You turn your back on your family. I tried to defend myself, but the more I said, the more they just didn't care. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. My parents didn't even give me the benefit of the doubt. Instead, I was just labeled as selfish. It wasn't about what I needed or what I was going through. It was all about them. After that conversation, I felt sick. It wasn't the first time they'd acted entitled, but it was the first time they outright said it. Things got worse after that. I tried to reach out, but my dad wouldn't take my calls. My mom, well, she didn't even want to talk to me. I figured it was just a rough patch, and things would smooth over like they always did. But then, I noticed something. I wasn't in the family group chat anymore. I thought maybe they were just giving me space, but no. No one said anything. No one reached out to ask how I was doing, or even if I was okay. I was just gone. And when I finally called my mom, she told me something that honestly took the wind out of me. "You are only useful for your money," she said. "You've done enough. Don't bother coming around anymore." Just like that, I was out. No more family gatherings. No more holidays together. It felt like they didn't even care that I was still their daughter. I wasn't part of the family anymore. And in a weird way, I felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying their burdens on my shoulders. I wasn't the one cleaning up their messes. It took me a while to adjust, but I started doing things for myself. I took that vacation I'd been dreaming about. I bought myself a new car, one that wasn't a hand-me-down or a family car. I paid off my debts and focused on my goals. It felt good. It felt like I was finally living for me. Then, out of nowhere, almost a year later, I get a voicemail from my brother, Daniel. I didn't call him back right away. Part of me didn't want to. I had moved on, and honestly, I didn't want to get dragged back into whatever mess they had created. After everything that had happened, I figured they were finally learning to stand on their own 2 feet, right? That's what I told myself. I didn't need to be their savior anymore. But I'll admit, the curiosity got to me. I want to know what was going on. Maybe I was a little curious about what kind of mess they had gotten themselves into this time. So I called Daniel back. When he answered, there was a noticeable hesitation in his voice. "Hey, thanks for calling back." I didn't know who else to reach out to. I didn't interrupt. I just let him talk, and after a long pause, he finally got to the point. "Mom and Dad, they're in a ton of debt. More than I thought. Their house is on the line, and Dad's business is failing again. They have bills piling up, medical expenses, loans. They're in over their heads, and they're asking me for help. But I don't have the money. I barely have enough to cover my own bills, and I know it's asking a lot, but they need you." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't even know how to respond. The idea that they were in this much trouble wasn't even surprising anymore. But what caught me off guard was the way Daniel was talking. He sounded desperate. He didn't sound like the usual entitled sibling I knew. I was used to him showing up when he needed something, but this time there was an urgency in his voice that I wasn't expecting. He continued, "I know you're probably pissed at them, but they're my parents too. I don't know what to do. You're the only one who has the means to help." His words hung in the air. I could tell he wasn't asking me for a handout for himself, but it still hit me the wrong way. For years, I've been the one bailing him out, and this time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to help. It felt like I was being asked to jump back into the same old role they'd put me in before. Fixer, ATM, whatever you want to call it. I could feel the old resentment creeping up again. But then, something in me stopped. Maybe it was that part of me that still cared, the part of me that always tried to do the right thing. Or maybe I was just curious about how bad it really was. Either way, I agreed to meet him the next day. I wasn't ready to make any promises, but I needed to know more. The next day, I met Daniel at a coffee shop. When he sat down across from me, I could tell that the usual bravado wasn't there. He didn't have his typical cocky, self-assured smile. Instead, he looked worn down, exhausted. "I'm not asking for a handout," he started, before I even had a chance to speak. I don't know what else to do." He went on to explain that my parents had been hiding the extent of their problems for a while. They've been falling deeper into debt, not just from my mom's medical bills, but from the multiple failed business ventures my dad had started and failed over the years. Apparently, Their financial situation had taken a major turn for the worse. The house, the cars, the business, it was all on the verge of falling apart. Daniel didn't get into specifics, but I could tell that he wasn't just trying to guilt trip me. He was genuinely worried. They keep saying they're going to lose everything, and it's eating them up. I can see it. They can't even afford groceries, and I can't do anything. I don't know what to tell them anymore. I listened, but in the back of my mind, I was already trying to figure out how I felt. My parents had always acted like I owed them, like I was supposed to help because, well, I was the one who had the money. The good, responsible daughter who'd never let them down. But I wasn't that person anymore. I'd been forced out of that role, and I'd worked hard to move on. Daniel paused, as if waiting for me to say something, but I just let the silence linger. I wanted to see if he'd keep talking. Finally, he sighed and added, "Look, I don't know if we're even going to consider helping, but I need to try. They're too proud to ask, but I know they need you." I know they do. The way he said it, like he was speaking for them, felt like another version of the same old manipulation. But then again, I could see how stressed he was, how defeated. He wasn't the one who'd been saving them all these years, but he was the one stuck in the middle now, feeling the pressure of their mess. We sat there for a while, both quiet, just sipping our drinks. I couldn't bring myself to say what I was thinking, but I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. So, after meeting Daniel, I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. The weight of everything had settled in, and I could feel myself being pulled in two directions. On one hand, I had the part of me that wanted to help, the part that still loved them despite everything. On the other hand, there's the side of me that was fed up, that didn't want to go back into the same cycle of being used. It felt like every time I tried to take a step forward, they yanked me right back into their chaos. A few days passed, and I couldn't get the situation out of my mind. My parents hadn't reached out directly, and part of me wondered if Daniel had exaggerated the urgency, but the other part of me knew he was probably telling the truth. He wasn't one to embellish things, and I could tell he was genuinely scared for them. It wasn't just about their financial situation anymore. It was about the toll it was taking on them emotionally and physically. I kept wondering how they'd gotten this far, why they hadn't asked for help sooner, why they'd buried themselves so deep in this mess. But then I thought about how my mom had always been prideful, always too proud to ask for help. And my dad, well, he was too stubborn to admit failure. They'd kept their problems hidden for so long, and now it seemed like it was finally catching up to them. One night, as I sat in my living room staring at my phone, I started to get an idea of what my next move might be. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to rush into it. If I was going to help, I wanted to do it on my terms. No more bailing them out without question. No more silently carrying the burden for them. If they wanted my help, they had to prove they were serious about changing things. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the respect I deserved. They needed to understand that I wasn't just some safety net they could rely on without any consequences. I wasn't a machine for their convenience. If they wanted to rebuild, they had to show me they were willing to work for it. So I sent Daniel a text. It was short but clear. If they're serious, we'll need a plan. No more handouts. They need to show they're willing to change before I do anything. I didn't hear back from him right away. The message probably hit him harder than I intended, but I wasn't about to back down now. I was tired of being their fallback, their fixer. I wanted to see if they were willing to put in the effort, not just make empty promises. The next day, Daniel called again. I talked to them, he said, his voice tentative. They're not happy about it, but they're willing to work on a plan. I think they realize how serious you are. Something in his voice told me this was different. They weren't just asking for a quick fix. They were trying, however reluctantly, to meet me halfway. I hadn't expected them to come around so quickly. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. But as I thought about it more, I started to wonder, was this really a change? Or was it just another manipulation, another play for my resources. I didn't want to rush into anything, but I also didn't want to ignore the possibility that they might finally be waking up. After a few days of thinking it over, I decided to give my parents the benefit of the doubt. Daniel had promised they were willing to do things differently, and I didn't want to be the person who just closed the door on them. It felt like the right thing to do, at least for now. I agreed to meet with them, but only on the condition that we sat down and talked about a plan. A real one. No more promises or vague assurances. The meeting was, well, it was awkward. My parents, for once, didn't try to hide the desperation in their voices. My mom was the first to speak up. We've messed up. We know that. We've been too proud, too stubborn. But we can't lose everything. We'll do whatever it takes to fix this, but we need you. My dad, typically the silent type in these situations, just nodded, his face pale and worn. I could see how hard this was for him. For all the mistakes they'd made, I knew they weren't terrible people. They just had their priorities backwards, and they had no idea how to dig themselves out of the hole they'd put themselves in. The conversation went on for a while, and eventually I laid out what I needed to see from them if I was going to help. I'll cover some of the immediate bills, I told them, but you're going to have to get your finances in order. I want to see a budget, a plan for cutting unnecessary spending, and a commitment to rebuilding your business responsibly. No more shortcuts. If I'm going to help you, you need to show me you're serious. They agreed. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page. I wasn't just being used, I was finally being treated like an equal. Maybe this was a turning point. Maybe they really were willing to change. But here's the thing. A few weeks into the plan, I started to notice signs that they weren't taking it as seriously as I had hoped. They were cutting a few expenses, sure, but their old habits were creeping back in. My dad started talking about new business ideas again, big risks that he couldn't afford. And my mom, well, she was still buying things she didn't need, things that weren't in the budget. At first, I tried to let it go. I wanted to believe they were doing their best. But then, a few days ago, they called me again. They were falling behind on the bills I had helped them with. Their car payment was overdue, and they were asking for more money. This time, I said no. I told them that if they couldn't stick to the plan we agreed on, I wasn't going to bail them out again. And that's when it all came crashing down. My mom went off. She started crying, telling me how selfish I was, how I was the one who had everything and didn't care about family. My dad joined in, making comments about how I was turning my back on them, how I was the one who always claimed to be so responsible, but now I was letting them sink. And then Daniel called me. He was angry too, accusing me of being heartless, saying I was going to let them lose everything because of a few mistakes. They blocked me from the family group chat, and I haven't heard from them since. I'm left wondering if I made the right decision. Here's where I need opinions. Am I the a-hole for cutting them off? I feel like I've given them so many chances, but they keep slipping back into their old ways. They're still my parents, but they've hurt me so many times before, and I don't want to go back into the cycle of constantly rescuing them. Did I do the right thing, or am I just being too harsh? I'd really appreciate your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think they did the right thing? Or would you have helped your family out in the same situation?